a big part of how we transmit our gift into the world, whether it be through our loving and also through our actual professional offering. The more open we are to our surroundings, we transmit and receive information. We're in conversation with the person in front of us by having an open posture.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I have a very special guest that I'm really excited about because this is a topic that we have not covered here really in depth. And I have with me Eli Buren, and he's been a dedicated practitioner since 1998 with in-depth training in yogic embodiment, awareness, sexual yoga, martial arts, somatic studies, outdoor leadership, and most importantly, how these disciplines may be lived in a down-to-earth manner. Eli has taught workshops and retreats internationally since 2005, working with thousands of students across the USA, Europe, and Asia. And he is really gifted at guiding students into a deeper understanding of spirit authenticity and true presence, teaching how to live each realization with integrity throughout the body. And I'm really excited because I don't know how many people have been on like a men's retreat or have been a part of a men's group. I've been lucky enough to been in a couple of those and experience a couple of those. And it's really, really tremendously powerful. So really excited, Eli, to have you here today and jump into it.
Great. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. And so before we kind of jump into more questions, maybe a little brief background about kind of how you got to where you are today.
I mean, certainly it's always a combination between a clear plan of a vision where you're going, sort of penetration into the unknown, mixed with the utter acceptance and vulnerability of having no clue what's going to happen to you, even in this conversation or tomorrow or next day. So it's always a play between planning and mystery. And I think partly I would say I feel blessed to have met the people I met along the path that turned my attention towards areas I wasn't looking at that point, that were not generally taught as we are raised in the school systems we are. And unless you grew up with a very unique set of parents, most people aren't trained to look inside themselves. They're not trained to look beyond the boxes that were presented. So one has to either be a unique kind of person that happens naturally, or through tragedy, where things happen, trauma, tragedy sometimes cracks that open and that allows you to look, or the meeting someone along the way that has made that path and they're willing to show you, and usually it's a combination of all three of those. So let me just be a little more clear. So that's how I got here. And then I specifically, in around 1998, I began to turn my attention towards refining how I showed up in this body, how I showed up in my life. I was realizing that I wasn't that aware coming out of school and the systems I came out of. I met a couple teachers, and I dove very deeply into yogic practices, mentoring with David Deida, with some other really profound teachers that you probably wouldn't have heard of, and got into men's work, got into coaching, and now I lead immersions, I lead retreats. And the thing that I really am passionate about is mixed with like the optimization of performance, of skill sets, of really knowing how to work this mechanism, this instrument as best I can. The other side of that is what I'm really interested to is like, who do we become when we're succeeding as much as when we're failing? Who do we become as we get older and some of the skills we had earlier on either grow or diminish? And so that's the realm of whatever happens in our life, we get the choice of how we want to show up to it. And the agency we do have is our breath, our posture, and our attitude. Whether we're in tremendous suffering, whether we're in tremendous success, those variables are there. So I like to train in that dimension, because I feel like that's the piece that ages well versus the external part of our body doesn't age so well, and other things don't either. So I'll stop there, but that's a little bit about me.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. And I know a lot of people have probably heard of David Deida, who wrote the book, a very, very popular book called The Way of the Superior Man, which is a great book. I read that many years ago, probably need to revisit that again. And yeah, what I really like about this is kind of what I've realized on this podcast. We've talked a lot about health, and then there's like the don't eat this, don't eat that, eat more of this, right? But it's like, in the end of the day, for the most part, the information is out there and it's pretty clear about like what to do to improve your health. So it's like, why aren't people doing it? Right. Like, and you get to the mental aspect of things, you get to how people are showing up or not showing up, kind of like what you were saying. So yeah, really excited to dive into the three things you mentioned as well. Maybe we should start there. So breath, posture, and attitude you mentioned as three things that I guess kind of tools, I guess, that we have at our disposal.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, they're showing up right now. So that's always, it's good to see what we're doing in the moment, you and I particularly, and then any of your listeners in the future. Just check, are you breathing? I mean, of course you are, but what is the quality of your breath is a better way of saying it. How deep is it? How present are you? Did you know were you consciously breathing, or did you catch yourself when I said, are you breathing? I haven't thought about my breath all day or all week. And, so first of all,
I mean, it's a great point. And for the longest time, by the way, I used to be so exhausted after doing a webinar or a podcast, because I would get off and I would realize, oh my God, I didn't even take a breath, like a real breath, the entire time. And so these days I have to, like, every time I'm not talking, at least, and maybe I need to probably work on learning how to breathe the right way while I'm talking as well. But yeah, when I'm not talking, I try to make a conscious effort of doing some more deeper breathing, belly breathing. But you make a great point. How many of us aren't even aware of how we're breathing?
And then when we become aware of our breath, then we get to look at the quality of it. And that tells a lot about the quality of our presence and our life. So deep, relaxed, generous breath. Generally, that's a deep, relaxed, generous life, in your intimacies and with your finances and with all things. Tense, contracted, anxious breath. So we get to take a look at how we're living through the quality of how we're breathing moment to moment. And so it's really immediate, and it's with us all the time. It's the most essential thing we do. It's the primary medicine of our being. And so, yeah, breath is there. And then you have.
But before we move on with breath, because it's such a powerful one that it seems like you are pretty well versed in as well. And I'm sure on your retreats, you guys are doing either some sort of breath work, or maybe you're helping people breathe a certain way. Is there anything you can share? Because I think people may be listening to that and saying, yeah, I like, you're right. I don't even think about it. I'm shallow breathing. And, is there any kind of tips or thought process that you could share maybe for people listening?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. It's more like when to stop. And there's so many things I'd like to speak about. I'll offer a couple here. So the first one is breathing from surface to depth. And that can be applied to anything from breath to sex to finances. So if we stay with breath, you notice that you're breathing and it can be more surfacey, but begin to breathe in a way where you're aware of the oxygen entering through your nose or your mouth from the surface of your body. It passes by your nostril. You might feel the cool air or the warm air. And as you're inhaling, noticing how it goes towards depth, goes into your lungs. Perhaps it goes into some deeper part of your being if you pay attention to that. And then you exhale it and it comes back out again. So simply following that process of, maybe you're busy in the mind and thinking about a whole bunch of things, and to breathe from the surface of this moment into the depth of the core of who you are, what your purpose is here, like this heartbeat that's beating mysteriously, it changes the perspective from this gerbil in the mind trying to survive to a sense of agency and reverence towards life, because you realize that breath is so precious. So that's one practice that you can offer. You can practice all the time. And then I would make a distinction between the kind of breaths. And I mean, really, the breath is dynamic. So the more able we are to allow our breath to change depending on the environment, if we're working out, if we're relaxing, if we're, trying to go to sleep, if we're trying to work and stay focused. So there's very different dynamic breaths for different moments, and learning to actually be aware of your breath and bringing those breath patterns into your life gives you also a sense of agency on those patterns that tend to just unconsciously play out when you start to realize and shift different breaths for different moments. And the two main breaths that you'll notice are one of more of a focusing breath, which I practice through Qigong, through kind of optimizing slowing the breath down. You can do counts of, there's all kinds of versions. You can, inhale the count of 5.5, exhale the count of 5.5. You can do box breathing, 4, 4, 4, 4. So these are focus breaths that bring you into a state. Then there's release breaths that are more in the form of like cathartic, like breathing for long amounts of time, strong, big breaths, and you'll have emotional releases. You'll release tension, you'll release emotions. So those are a really good distinction. Do you want to focus and relax, or do you want to release and have an experience?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And then what about as a tool for people when they're triggered, right? If someone's triggered by something, how are you using breath in that particular instance?
Yeah, because that's going to be coming across all of our screens, sooner or later. And depending on, if you're in an intimate relationship or not, that's often quite a bit more often, because, and that's a conversation. Maybe we'll get into that. So if there's a moment you're triggered, or if you're a moment where you're just lost in your thoughts, so they're kind of the same thing. You're not aware of your body in this moment, and of just the depth of your breath. You're lost in the mind, or you're lost in triggered by something someone has done outside of yourself. Or if you're in a traumatic response which is kind of a trigger in a way, is a traumatic response where it's triggering something from the past usually, or sometimes it's triggering something in the moment, but there's a play between those two. So ideally, the breath brings you back into this moment, this instant, whatever's in front of you. And that's a deep, slow breath is what I would do. That's what I tend to do when I'm triggered. If I'm stuck in a trigger and it's going on for a long time and the person's not necessarily with me anymore, but I'm churning on something, there's a bit of a story, sometimes I'll do more of a release breath. And that is like doing an exercise session where if you were to go and do a strong run or do something very physical, it helps to move that through and then find center again. So breath is very much like that. But if you're in the moment with someone, I suggest, coming back to your physicality. So the gravitational of your own body, sitting, standing, the texture of your clothing on your skin, your breath, the texture of your breath going in, and really what you're attempting to do in a moment of trigger is to go beyond the childish, or I shouldn't say childish, but more adolescent aspect of us. We all have adolescent aspects, we've mature, but when we're triggered, we become adolescent and we contract in on something and we become me. This hurts me. So it becomes a defensive meanness. when we're mature, we're able to open up and feel that, okay, our partner's also having a situation, or the traffic we're getting triggered about, everyone's trying to get somewhere. It's not just me. Everyone's late here. And so it's spreading your awareness from the sense of me contracting in the moment to the air around you right now. So practice this, everyone. The air around you isn't contracted, isn't triggered. Right. If you feel it, there's no trigger in the air. So the trigger, where's the trigger happening? Inside of here, more likely. I'm pointing at my head for those of you that aren't watching. And so part of the practice is learning to loosen the muscle of tension in our own head and mind and start to sense the space around us. And then ideally sense the other living beings with us. Like there's a heartbeat in the person I'm triggered with. Like, okay, they're triggering me. Their face is upset. They're saying things that I don't like. And I can feel their heartbeat. And I know that I love this person, or like, they're not trying to hurt me. They're triggered too. And it's much easier said than done, but that's the process, is taking it from the contraction out into the expansion.
Nice. I love that. Before we move on to the other two, because it's kind of leading into this, and it's something I wanted to ask you about. Even as you just spoke about, like being aware of the air around you and feeling the shirt on your body and things like that, it's really about being more present, right? And wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit more about that. It's something that I think so many people struggle with, including myself. You hear it being, people say, be more present, the Power of Now book, and, all that kind of stuff. But yet we seem to many of us seem to still go about our day without ever thinking about that or being in touch, with the body. So yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts and how maybe you work with people to get more into their body and get more present, which I think for men may even be more challenging than for women,
Yeah, that's it's a really important point. And I often say and feel that presence is our, if not one of, it's our most important and valuable currency. So we can generate currency in, wealth and health and other areas. And yet if we're not present, we're not here, if nobody's home to experience those things, like you're just going to want to keep wanting more and more and more. And that's actually one of a lot of my clients, that tends to be the exchange, is they've put a lot of attention into developing currency in the world, and really well done, like professional masters at that. And yet in that, striving to build a business, to build a family, to build a wealth, they haven't necessarily put their attention towards building the currency of presence, towards building the currency of depth. And so that often is what comes after someone has all the things. They've got all the trinkets. They're successful enough. I mean, and if they're not careful, there's never an end to success. So there's always going to be more and more and more, yet they're still not there. People that have had a moment of either, awakening from that, or relationally where they're moving forward, yet they realize that their intimacy isn't as deep as they would like, or their wife is saying, okay, we're comfortable, but hello, is anybody home? Hello, or their children. And so life will, in a way, force us to become more present sooner or later. And how I work with presence is that, it's a very unique thing, depending on whether it's one-on-one, whether it's in a group, but generally, we have to train in moments where we are very present to know what that is. And usually in moments where there's a kind of an urgency, things become very clear. So if you hold your breath, and you hold it out for some people 30 seconds, for some people 3 minutes, you're going to become very present to your situation, let's just say. And there's many different things like that. Often challenge brings us to that edge where we hold something longer. If we do more reps than we would like to do on our own accord, it presses us to a place of all there is this moment, your heartbeat racing, your body here, your attention on what's in front of you. And so having that imprint in our system, then you can go back to that, and then you can begin to feel that sense of when you meaning me, meaning anyone that's listening, us, when we basically become distracted and disassociated from our body and our experience into our mind, into this world of distractions, which is incredibly potent these days with all our devices and all the things that surround us. Great gifts, but also huge addiction to distraction. So becoming present, if we're practitioners, we go towards those moments, and that's important. So go towards the thing that's going to wake you up rather than waiting for it to come after you. Because if we wait too long, we're going to be forced into presence when we lose someone we love, when we lose something we love, when our own health starts to fail. Like, we're kind of, reality's shaped in a way where if you don't pay attention, it's going to come closer in eventually, and it's going to shake you. It's going to slap you. It's going to caress you. It's going to do all the things it does. And that's where we get to choose. What's the quality of our breath? What posture are we holding? What's our attitude towards this moment? Are we refusing it and feeling like a victim to reality? Or are we, essentially saying, this is something here for me to learn? And so presence it's a hard one to.
What about with so I'll just give myself as an example, right? So I want to be more present with my wife, and I want to be more present with my kids. Any advice for me?
Well, since we're still on the breath piece, one of the essential ways of being present to another being is noticing that they're breathing. And that seems simple, but this is a pretty deep yogic practice of intimacy and of breath that I'll share here. I didn't say this in the breath before, but I'll share it here now. So say you're sitting with your kids, or let's just say your wife, and you're having a dinner, and you're thinking about the day, and there's things that are still rolling through you, and you want to be more present, but your mind's kind of going, and she wants you to be more present too. If one is able to actually notice the inhalation, the exhalation of your partner's breath, that means you're paying attention enough to see. I mean, she's got to be breathing a little bit. And if she's a healthy person, you'll really see the breath. And then the second part of that is, it's called synchronized breathing, where you begin to inhale at the same time that she's inhaling, or he's inhaling if it's a friend. It doesn't have to be a polarity thing. It could be with a good friend. I do this with men together. I could do with your child. You could do it with your cat sitting on your lap. You could breathe with anything. And the moment you do, you sync up into a kind of, hey, I'm here with you. I'm here enough to notice your breath. I'm present enough to actually stay in that bond. It doesn't mean you have to follow the exact breath, but there's some relationship. So maybe you inhale at the same time. Maybe you take two breaths for one of their breaths, or vice versa. So that's one way of definitely linking up.
I love that.
I mean, it's you're asking the $1 million question there, because how do you stay present? And I'm sure there's thousands of apps that are like the Presence app, Waking Up app, all these apps that are really useful and really good. And it's like the same thing that you spoke about in the beginning. We all know that it's a good idea to be present, but then we're sucked into our day and we realize that we forgot about everything the whole day or the whole week. Or for some people, it's a decade. You can get sucked into something and boom, you pop out 40 years old, 50 years old, and you're like, what was I doing for the last 10 years?
Mm.
Totally unpresent to, it was just going through the motions. And so I that's why I say you have to go towards it, because otherwise it's going to eventually, it's going to be shock or tragedy or loss or any of the things we're resisting with all our might. Those things they bring presence very fast. It's hard not to be present when you're you're in pain, or when you're losing something you love. Then you realize, wow, I want to be present with this thing, because I'm not just taking it for granted, whether that's a loved one, whether that's your own physical body. Um, so
Mm.
I'll say one last thing about that is that a daily practice is how you stay present. And that's how it's, we could apply that to anything. So how do you stay healthy? Daily practice. How do you, healthy food, you eat the right things, but the same thing spiritually. You wake up in the morning, or sometimes throughout the day, you ring the bell, metaphorically or actually, of I'm
Mm-hmm.
here. And that's meditation, that's spiritual practice, that's anything that reminds you that you are here and your life is precious, your breath is temporary. And I know it's easy to say, but anytime you've ever felt that, you know what I mean. I can see the way you're nodding your head. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that feeling, and it's so precious when you're there. So it
Yeah.
takes a kind of muscle to build, to stay present to it. And a lot of physical practices are necessary, because your body is where it happens. If we're not in our body, we're not going to be present.
Mm. Love that. Love that. Yeah. And and I've heard of the one of syncing up your breathing with your partner, even in terms of in relation to having sex, and syncing up your breathing. I've heard of that as being a very, very powerful technique with your partner as well. So yeah, this is really good stuff, and I also agree, and that's why I try in the mornings to leave my phone on airplane mode, in the other room, and go outside and get some sunlight, and I even now try not to be under my covered patio unless it's too sunny or too hot, because what I even realize, being just open, literally like having the open sky over my head, makes me more open and more present.
Right.
So yeah, those are really great, really great stuff there. I'm gonna definitely try that with my wife, as well as with my kids. Look at their breathing, sync up my breathing, really kind of get in touch and experience, the love that I have with them, and focus on that. And yeah, just I really like that a lot. And I think also as it comes to health, I think a lot of people are not present when they're overeating or eating bad things. They're just right. They're in their head. They're rushing. They're kind of, the monkey mind is doing its thing, and then they're not really feeling into their body or being present, as to what really will nourish their body at this moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Two pieces there. I want to add that synchronized breathing, what you described it, but I want to just put it into words, is you do that with beings, other mammals. And when you walk outside and see the sky above your head, and that traditionally is, the alchemist, or the qigong master in the mountains. You see these images. Basically, it's the same thing. You begin doing a synchronized breath with the landscape, with the elements, with the sun, with the river. And that's a way of building that presence and intimacy with a forest itself, instead of just like a plant, so you can literally train to do that. And then I think most people, when you actually do that enough, you realize that you're not doing it, you're being done. So you're kind of trying to breathe with it, but at a certain point you realize that you're being breathed by that force of nature, that is the elements, the wind. It's pumping your heart right now. It's like liquid coursing through your body. You're being done by it. And that's a
Mm.
beautiful feeling of presence when you really feel that. You said something really important. I don't think I want to go too deeply into this. It's a different context, but it's really important to name. So why we're not present. you got to look at that first. And it's devices, technology, the whole thing. But that's secondary. More upstream to that is trauma. Basically, trauma is what, and to be more specific about that, experiences earlier in our life, childhood, or even, relatively recently, but to have an experience that is undigestible and was too strong for our nervous system, so that all we could do was to either close down or actually disassociate it. In some way, it was like, I can't experience this experience. And most people don't remember that. It's often when you're a child, whether it's just, you didn't feel loved enough by someone, or whether it's an extreme situation. The sensation is, I can't experience this. I can't be here. And then that becomes trauma, and that becomes lodged into our body. And to the degree that we're not able to recognize that, or we're unwilling to experience it, it's very hard to be present with our body and our emotions, because most of our energy is going towards turn the other way, distract, do something else. And those distractions can be good sometimes. Sometimes it's like, go climb a mountain, or write a song. So sometimes the things, they're not a bad at nature, but you can see the difference between being able to accept what is and sit in silence, sit by yourself for even just 5 minutes these days. Most people can't even just sit and put their hands on their lap and not fidget, not fiddle, not do something. So that's what I would say, is look at that first. Like, whoa, and that's the whole realm of therapy. And there's really great methods, that I'm sure all your listeners have explored, and parts work, IFS, working with boundaries and attachments, and just there's a lot of really fantastic work that's coming out these days. So dive into that. That will help us become more present with our emotional experience. And then there's coming back to like the actual yogic practice of staying present with the moment.
Love it. And I really think that there's some quote I heard recently, or I can't remember if it was Naval or one of these guys, but it was like, all of our problems come from our inability to sit alone in silence, like in a room or something.
I've heard
like
that.
that.
That's
right?
a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. I really love that. And I think, it's so true, right? If people wake, so many people wake up, check their phone, turn on the news, turn on the radio, like they're just like, and then it's just like, they're just in their head. They're just being taken in whatever direction the outside world is sucking them into, rather than being present, rather than, really, having intention, being intentional about how they're going to, go about their day and create their day. So I love this conversation. I do want to touch on the other two as well. So posture and attitude. Let's go with posture next.
It's funny too, to dive in with this. I didn't, we could choose any few words and just dive deeper with them. I wasn't intending this to be the structure, but I like how it's unfolding. So posture. Let me widen that out a little bit. So actually, there's two main points. One is, as I said, with breath, notice your posture as you're listening to this. If you're slumped over and, looking at a phone with like your head hung over and the life force not moving through the body, or are you sitting in an open posture with your breath free, your eyes clear, your spine open? Like, that's the difference between being awake and being in asleep, or in a closure, basically. And you look around you, most people are curled in on themselves, self-oriented towards their own thing. There's very few places you walk into a public space and you see someone just sitting there aware, looking at you, just aware of you. And that's a healthy person, is going to, see and experience all the things around them.
Most people think that's like a weirdo, right?
Exactly.
Who's this guy sitting up with perfect posture, looking around the room and being, feeling everyone in the room, right? It's like, who is it? Why is he not hunched over looking down at his phone like the rest of us?
It's like it's like a wild animal in a way. It's something to be sort of scared about. And it's not to say that one can't be. The distinction is one doesn't always have to have the posture open as long as we know the difference. And that's the cue, because if someone doesn't know the difference between an open and a closed posture, then you're closed. But if you've trained to open, and then sometimes you're slouching over and you're in your phone and and then you catch yourself and you're like, oh yeah. Or you've had a long day and some part of you is like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to rest right now and just be totally relaxed in this couch and just let myself rest. So it's not like someone has to be militant about having always an open posture, but knowing whether it's open or not has a big part of how we transmit our gift into the world, whether it be through our loving and also through our actual professional offering. The more open we are to our surroundings, we transmit and receive information. We're in conversation with the person in front of us by having an open posture. We're in relationship with life itself because our antenna is more open. When it's closed, we're limited. We don't see as much. There's not as much information coming in. And
for sure.
And our core gets transmitted. So if our hands are soft, our eyes are clear, basically our own freedom and confidence, or our love and our radiance is being transmitted through our body, versus hands in pocket, fidgeting, touching, eyes darting around the room. That's basically showing our own insecurity or our own fears. So we're transmitting it whether we like it or not.
Yeah, that is so good. And I remember I actually first learned this from Tony Robbins when I first heard him say, what is it, picture a depressed person in your head. What do they look like? They're hunched over, right? They're slouching, they're hunched over, their posture, right? Their physiology is like you can imagine a depressed person and you can see what their body posture is compared to, someone who's energized and so I think about that quite a bit. And, even when you see a lot of people with their arms crossed, even, right? Like, having a conversation with someone with their arms crossed, not realizing, right, like that can be affecting how open they are to actually receiving information. And one more thing I'll say about that, when I took a certification class for neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, back in 2007, very long time ago. And the teacher actually, before we started each day, did something called the learning state, where they actually had a little circle, like a little dot above, like on the wall behind them, like a little higher than their head. And they would say, okay, like look at that dot and now expand out and notice everything to the sides of you, like everything to the furthest to the right and everything to the furthest to the left. And apparently they had some study or something that they were referencing where literally students in school who did this went up like one grade. Like if they were a B, they went to an A, simply by, before class starting, looking at this dot on the wall and then expanding their sort of horizon, I guess, or expanding their sight as far as they can to the right, noticing. So like right now I can notice the wall on my right side and I can notice the wall on the left side, even though I'm looking, straight here. And so that literally can make you more open and better able to receive and understand new information.
That's fantastic. I absolutely support that, and I call that panoramic perception. So it's this open state of soft, and in Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong, that's built in. You train that your soft gaze, which basically means you're taking in everything around you. You're not focusing and targeting on one thing. So we can do that even when we look at screens. You can learn to relax your gaze some and look beyond the screen, take in all the things that you were just describing. So I think that's a really important for our eyes and for our attention, of where are we focused down to a little point, or are we spacious in our consciousness and feeling this whole space?
Yeah, and I notice it when I'm on my phone. If I'm have my phone, and I actually don't like to work on my phone. I don't like, I try to limit the phone use, and I need to limit it more, but I literally notice, if you think about it, right? When you're looking at this little device, you have tunnel vision, right? You're literally have this narrow focus to this little tiny device versus the opposite, what we just spoke about, kind of expanding. And I can feel it. Like, I'm sure everyone's had that moment where they're like, they realize that they've just been staring at their phone for 45 minutes straight, and they kind of wake up out of this trance, and they're like, whoa, like I've just had tunnel vision for the last 45 minutes.
Right.
So really, really good. I think that we're bringing this to people's awareness.
I want to add a few more pieces with the posture, and this links back to what you described around being triggered. So it sort of fits into that same category of how do you come beyond that, or how do you open through it? Uh, One of the main practices that I've trained in, and something I teach people, and I feel like is a practice that we get an opportunity to practice the rest of our life, is is keeping the front surface of your being available. So that means soft eyes, soft jaw, throat, relaxed heart, no armor, relaxed belly, relaxed genitals. So your whole front surface relaxed and your spine clear, and then turning that towards. So if you're triggered, what happens? Everything closes and we contract our face, our belly, our genitals. We contract and we protect, which is necessary in moments. Like there are moments where if someone's throwing something at you, like, yeah, protect yourself. But most of the time we're trained to do that, and we're holding this contraction the rest of our life, even when there's no apparent threat around us. So part of intimacy and part of posture is the posture towards life. And this kind of goes into attitude, but I'll save that for a moment. But it's
Mm.
whatever happens, whether it's a fight with the wife, or the husband, or whether it's traffic, whether it's an injury, basically trusting enough to relax the front surface and feel like, what is there here for me to learn? How can I show up to this moment with an open posture, which is a way of saying thank you to life. Like, the least I can do, like, I've been fed, I've been, clothed.
Mhm.
We're incredibly fortunate to be born where we are, and to have all the safety and nourishing foods that we do. The least I can do is to have an open posture and thank life just by sitting open and breathing, rather than contracting and blaming and feeling like this life is, so it's like that subtle little thing is the big practice. That's a lifelong practice. And I'm going
Yeah.
to say one
Yeah.
other, actually, if you want to say something,
Yeah, I do. It's
differently.
funny as you said that, because I was literally just thinking the opposite of that, right? Like, uh, you just said open your body, relax your genitals, and then I thought like, oh, that's why they call people a tight ass. Like, someone is a tight ass literally because he's holding his ass tight, like he's holding his contraction, and we have that term called the tight ass for that type of person, which is actually kind of funny. And I never thought about where that came from, but so now hopefully everyone will think about, don't be a tight ass, relax your body, and yeah.
And you can start to there's a direct correlation between our mouth, our jaw, and our anus. And so
Mm.
generally a tight jaw means a tight sexual lower center. Let's say it's just your pelvic floor is a way of saying it. So that's just, you can just see that someone's smiling and, relaxed jaw. Generally it's going to be relaxed down below. Similarly with the brow of our forehead, where many people, when they're focused here, it gets contracted and tight. That is often associated with the dantian, your lower belly, like that center of a relaxed belly often shows up
Mm.
as a relaxed, forehead. And of course, some
Mm.
people genetically are more prone to having lines and creases, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you can tell the difference when it's there because of attention versus it just slowly coming over years.
Mm.
So I want to describe one thing that I think you'll find um, I find interesting around posture, and this is really useful to both just to self-reflect on how our posture is showing up, but to take the posture out of just the physical body. And if you look across time, anything that has really some merit and value, people have found it across time, and through different traditions, you'll find versions of it. Like they found it on their own. They weren't like copying each other. They just arose. And so they started talking about it. And there are certain things you can find like that. And one of them is throughout all traditions, they'll talk about some version of body, mind, emotion or heart, and spirit. And so there's other ones too. But if we look at those as your actual bodies, so you can take on different postures, obviously physically, we're talking about our physical body. You can take on a posture that's more or less open, more or less guarded. One can train the physical body to put on muscle and become more muscly mass, or become more flexible. And both of those have their gifts and their liabilities. If it's all muscle and you'd have no flexibility and it's just this flexed muscle, that's not healthy. Mm-hmm. So one can do the same thing in the emotional body. So one can learn to have more flexibility emotionally in emotional conversations, or to have more muscle to stay in a hard emotional conversation longer than you want to. Or the emotional posture can be more one of I'm open to this conversation instead of I'm contracted and closed. Even if your body looks open, you can be faking it, but if inside one's heart it's like tense and contracted, the emotional posture is closed. We can do it mentally. You can be more or less flexible in the way one thinks about something, or like clear. You can develop the capacity to stay focused with something longer than you want to. So you can develop the mental body, and you can also develop the spiritual body, which it's harder to describe, but it's what we were talking about around breathing with life. So, being able to feel. And when I say feel, I'm not speaking about just an emotional sensation. I'm talking more about the freedom of your awareness. So if your awareness is free from churning in the head, free from just being in my own space, then that freedom is your capacity to feel life, to feel the air touching your skin, and then you can feel as far as you can. You can feel your family in the home. You can feel the people in the cars beside you. You can feel out into the city. You can feel, and that's spiritual practice, is when you start to feel the life and the birth, the death, the churning, the eating of the forest that's happening right now. There's tremendous beauty. There's tremendous hardships, and feeling all of that is a spiritual posture of openness.
Love that.
Kind of a cross training. You can work with all the bodies.
Yeah. I really love that. Let's touch on attitude, the last of the three.
Yeah. So the most simple way of that is and there's been some great writings about this, from, I won't even mention names, but there's all kinds of great writings on that's all you have when everything else can be taken away from a human being, and your attitude towards what's happening is all you really have, whether you're in a jail cell or whether you're, starving in a forest or whatever it is. So the attitude is at the most essential sense is coming from a place of I either trust life, I trust that whatever's happening to me, as excruciating as it is or as beautiful as it is somehow part of some bigger thing that I trust, even though I don't like it always. Sometimes I wish it wasn't happening, but my attitude is one of, okay, I'm going to open my nervous system. I'm going to open my breath. I'm going to learn something here and show up and do my best to love and meet this moment with presence. I want to be here. So my attitude is one of that, versus the adolescent attitude that you see everywhere in our culture and the whole world, is blaming and victimhood. And there's there's lots of reasons. I don't want to get into that. There's
Mhm.
versions of victimhood where people need to go through that. That's a healthy thing to feel for a moment, but to have that as a general attitude towards life, that's problematic. So,
Right.
our attitude is what defines us.
Right, right. And you made me think of the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That
Right,
was the one
where
that it was one of the ones that I was thinking about, but I didn't name. But I'm glad you
I
did.
thought so. Yeah, I thought so. Right, where he's in a concentration camp, and he clearly talks about in the book the difference between the people who survived and the people who did not. And it really came down to their mental attitude, for sure.
Right.
Well, Eli, this has been amazing. We just really scratched the surface here, like high level stuff. I know in your retreats and your coaching, you go deep. And I know there are some people who may want to go deep or should go deep and they don't know it yet. But there's a lot of people I think that could really benefit from your work, from maybe going on one of your retreats or working with you one on one. And how can people learn more from you and follow your work, get more connected with you?
The easiest way is that you can find me on my website at eliburen.com, and that will have a schedule of events. I have my week-long Zion immersion, which is out near you, May 11th right through 19th. And that's
Nice.
outdoors. That's for men. That's probably the deepest program I offer. And then you can find me there with coaching, and I do some online programs for training the physicality. And then Instagram, I have a very small presence there, but you can connect me with there, and you'll see when I'm offering things in the future.
Amazing. So that's eliburen.com, ELIBUREN.com, and just your name on Instagram as well.
Yep.
Amazing. Well, I really, really enjoyed this. I love these conversations. I feel like I'm becoming a better person just by having this conversation with you. So I know people listening are feeling the same, and just want to say thank you. And I appreciate you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom here today.
Been great. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. And just a reminder, if you haven't yet tried any of our Peak Performance products, you get 20% off your first order. We have one of the largest selection of USDA certified organic superfood powders, as well as very high quality supplements. And you get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's www.buypeakperformance.com.